Hi, we're going to talk about the magical realism. Our team is made up of Carlos Montero Maldonado, Miranda Urbina Olivares, Montserrat García Garona, Samantha Sánchez Lara, and Fabiana Alarcón.
Magical realism is a literary style with a narrative that shows unreal or fantastic situations as something common in daily life that takes place in a real context. In this type of works, an almost perfect universe is created, and it is very difficult for the reader to differentiate where the magic begins and where it ends.
Historical facts about magical realism. The term magical realism was first introduced by the German critic Frank Roh in 1925, but the term didn't name a movement till the 1940s. The first recognition that the movement has was around the 1920s and the 1930s, although it denominated as a different name. It wasn't famous at all as the Latin American predecessor. The second part of the movement was around the 1940s and 50s in Latin America. The writers of this region combined the raw austerities and the French surrealism with some indigenous mythologies. It became popular in the 1960s and 70s around the time of the Cold War and the Cuban Revolution, and this was the cause of the recognition of all the world. This genre has caused many different debates around the world because everyone has a different opinion surrounding this topic. The main cause of these debates is the lack of definition of the movement.
I'm gonna mention 5 important characteristics of magical realism. 1. The context is a poor or marginal place, or a forgotten town. We can find a clear example in the work of Juan Rulfo, Pedro Páramo, where there is a town called Comala, described as a ghost town, gray, depressing, and silent. Comala, despite being a lonely town, is full of ghosts and sinners. 2. Chronological time does not exist. A paragraph can begin by narrating something from the present to later become a memory of the past, then return to the present and alternate to the future, and so on. We can see an example of this in Alejandro Hernández's work, Nos imputaron la muerte del perro de enfrente, where Efraín remembers his childhood and rambles a bit about it, and then talks about the future within the same memory. 3. The strange or magical is part of the daily life. Situations that seem impossible to us, for the characters in the stories, is what happens every day, and for them, it is not strange because in their universe, that kind of things happen. For example, that the dead have conversations with each other. 4. It is narrated with the senses. The perception of reality occurs with the senses. In magical realism, they are used to narrate what happens. For example, in the work of Sofía Segovia, El murmuro de las abejas, you can find texts like this one. That Tuesday, the sheets smell like lavender and sun. Do I remember? No, but I imagine it. 5. Magic is not explained. It is not important to justify supernatural events because for the characters, it is completely natural in their universe. Just as for us the cycle of the moon is normal, for them a 4-year flood is normal, as narrated in the work of Gabriel García Márquez, Cien años de soledad.
This genre is very important because it has the influence of a lot of American authors. Also, is one of the movements that everyone around the world recognizes as a Latin American movement.
I think magical realism is such an interesting genre because it represents the reality as something wonderful and original, takes the irreality from part of the daily life, and the language is really beautiful. Also, show their life like something amazing.
I think it's an important movement because it was born in Latin America and helped Latino jobs to get a lot of recognition and to get known all around the world.
For me, it is a pleasant experience to read things that make you doubt that certain situations are possible, but the way they write it, magical realism, takes you to another universe where they can be possible.
I think this is important because it explains us how the space between the real and the fantasy is created. Also, it's very interesting to see how these amazing worlds are created and developed with the time.
Conclusion. Why is magical realism important? Magical realism is important especially in Latin America because it is a type of gender of a political subversion. Latin American authors are free to talk about fantastic elements and show them as something normal. Also, it can be perceived as a way to show an alternative to an accepted reality. And this, for the other side, can be used as a tool against magical regimes.
Not only that is important, also magical realism shows the reality of women and men in Latin America, but in an original and creative way. Magical realism is unique because it doesn't want to wake emotions but express them using magical elements to capture those emotions. Also, make us see how wonderful everything can be seen through this gender. More wonderful, pretty, intense, and dramatic. And it's sad that such an important, realistic, and creative gender is not well recognized in the world such as the others.